Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, to check you're in the right place, we're going to be talking about design and technology in this session. You may or may not know that fairly recently the government have announced the creative industries as one of 5 key growth areas for the UK. And specifically out of that, they're wanting to grow creative clusters across the UK, adding 50 billion GVA. So that's a positive. The other thing that's just happened in the last week is that the Department for Culture, Media and Sport have released a creative industries sector vision. That is also leaning in on how important this sector is. To give you a couple of stats, from 2010 to 2019, the creative industries grew more than 1.5 times faster than the wider economy. In 2021, the creative industries generated 108 billion in economic value, employing about 2.3 million people, and that was a 49% increase on 2011. So this growing, full of potential sector. So that's what we're going to be talking about. To introduce myself, I'm Minnie Moll. I'm the Chief Executive of the Design Council. Why are we leading on this? Because design is at the heart of it, and design and technology together, really, really powerful area and powerful growth area. So we have a panel who are going to be able to dig into this. Before I introduce them, one little bit of glossary. I think you all probably know what AI is, artificial intelligence. For anyone who doesn't know what XR is, it will be referred to. XR is extended reality. So an umbrella term for virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, etc. So you'll certainly hear XR. And if there's other things that sound rather complicated, hopefully people will explain. So let me introduce who we have on the panel. On my left, we have Lord Clement-Jones. Lord Clement-Jones is the Liberal Democrat House of Lords spokesperson for science, innovation and technology. And he's the former chair of the House of Lords Select Committee on AI and the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on AI. Amongst other things, I am delighted that he's also an ambassador for ACID, which is anti-copying in design. Asha, on my right, Asha Easton is the Immerse UK lead at Innovate UK KTN. So Immerse UK is the UK's national innovation network for immersive and metaverse technology. And Innovate UK KTN work to grow immersive tech in the UK. Asha's also an original member of the London chapter of Women in Immersive Tech, and she's co-founder of the XR Diversity Initiative and an EDI advisor to Europe's first metaverse fund. Over on the far right is Damian. Damian Murphy is professor in sound and music computing at the Audio Lab in the School of Physics, Engineering and Technology here at the University of York. And he is director of XR Stories, which supports research and development for companies that are working at the cutting edge on digital technology here in Yorkshire and the Humberside. So 3 experts on tech. Let's start off. Asha, can you just talk to us where we are now and what the opportunity is in this sector?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak from the XR lens, as you mentioned. We write this immersive economy report every year with Immerse UK that kind of looks at kind of the national ecosystem and where it's at. And the last one that we published showed, significant growth in the sector. 2 of the big kind of overall trends that we noticed were helping to grow the space. The COVID actually accelerated the advancement of technology quite a lot, and so did does everyone who's heard about the metaverse, just out of curiosity? Yeah, you've heard it. Yeah, Meta changing their name to Meta. The metaverse doesn't exist yet. We can probably get into that maybe a little bit later. It would require the convergence of a number of different technologies, including immersive technologies, kind of like a core component of that. but that whole trend really, which is now been overtaken by AI, really helped to boost things as well. But overall, we have a really strong innovation ecosystem in the UK, just generally, through Innovate UK and research and development grant funding that exists, through the work of Innovate UK KTN, which is our larger parent organization that works to foster innovation cross-sector in the country, and the work that we've done around immersive. It's all working like very well and works very strongly. And overall, we've just seen much bigger trends in the space, it growing a lot. Private investment was at the highest levels it's ever been in 2021 from the last report that we wrote. And on an international level, because we're kind of like the window into the national ecosystem abroad, people come to us often to kind of work in the UK or extend their businesses here. And we find that the UK creatives are seen globally as some of the best in the world, and really best in class for creating immersive experiences. For anyone who doesn't know about like the film festivals around the world, like Venice, Cannes, South by Southwest, all of these massive international festivals where immersive work is shown and judged, UK companies are there en masse. They are always some of the best ones. They're winning all the time, and really we have some of a really amazing reputation internationally around creative immersive work. So I think it's very strong. And also I'll pass to Damian to be able to talk a bit more about like regionally why we're very strong as well around XR innovation, because he led one of the creative clusters in New York that had some funding to boost the ecosystem here specifically. And I think that it's very strong that we have these regional hubs that are also funded.
Yeah, perfect. It's a good segue to Damian.
Yeah, indeed, good link. Thank you. Ash has laid out sort of the opportunity and how good the UK is at doing this. And in fact, I remember something from the inaugural Immerse UK Student Awards only a month or so ago. It was sponsored by some of the key businesses in the UK, and they were saying as part of that it's definitely the case that if a student or a member of their staff has worked on a project, creative, immersive, technology-related project, it's a door opener internationally in terms of the perception of the skills base and the talent that the UK has and how desirable that is to companies all over the world. So I work at the University of York, and we run one of the creative clusters that are currently one of 9 creative clusters around the UK, and that have been highlighted as one of the key areas of success over the last 5 years to support the creative industries, and one of the areas of focus for the government's creative sector vision for the next 10 years about investing that same model of activity for creative industries businesses in 6 new areas around the country. So what does XR Stories do? It supports innovation in film, television and games across the whole breadth of Yorkshire. So York, obviously, we know is in North Yorkshire, but we spread our influence across West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire and also to Humberside. And over the last 4.5 years, we've run more than 200 projects. And these are typically projects that could be placing an intern into a creative industries company who want to explore something new in using XR technology. An example that we did, for instance, is putting someone working on interactive narratives in the Leeds Piano Festival, of all things. And it was a huge new area for the Leeds Piano Festival to explore, and a huge new area of technology for this individual to explore. So we've run more than 200 projects, ranging from very small like that to very large with global media companies. We have leveraged 20 million of co-investment into the region based on the funding that we supply to companies across Yorkshire and Humber. We've increased revenue for our companies in the region by about £6 million. We've created and maintained more than 500 jobs. And this is all based out of York and the University of York, working across our region. And we have a very diverse cluster, but it's all bound together by understanding that there's great talent across Yorkshire in film, TV and games technology. So that's what we've been doing for the last 4.5 years, and we're about to start also, that was launched in the sector vision this week, on a project called CoStar, and we're one of 4 national labs that are going to be installed around the UK to support infrastructure to support the creative industries, in particular creative screen industries and live performance industries. And so this is a partnership led by the University of York and Production Park, which is is an amazing, Europe's largest live events technology campus, which is just outside of Wakefield. You've probably never heard of it before, but I guarantee that the industry has heard of it, because that's where people like Beyonce, Coldplay, Lady Gaga, the Arctic Monkeys, that's where they go and rehearse when they're in Europe. And so they're a brilliant company that are problem solvers and designers about around stagecraft and technology and logistics, about how you get these wonderful productions out onto the road and transported around the world ultimately. So we're going to be working with them over the next 6 years, and we're going to put an R&D lab in their creative campus. So we're bringing together the University of York's work, Wakefield's reputation at production park in this area, and then supported by the creative industries in our region of Yorkshire and Humber to lead what the future is going to be doing.
Can you just jump in with one thing on the glossary side? Just to say that when we talk about real-time technology, or we talk about virtual production, when we talk about XR or virtual reality or augmented reality experiences, all of this is underpinned by games technology, because all of those experiences are built on games engines, the two biggest ones being Unreal and Unity, just because we'll probably mention it a few times.
And I think that's really important. And one of the other really important sort of foundations of this, particularly more so in the future, will be how AI is going to change this whole creative sector. Ultimately.
Another brilliant segue. Thank you, Damian.
Love a segue.
Tim, over to you with the AI lens. Again, what's the opportunity that you see?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because here we are talking about all the opportunities of AI, and I know we're going to come to the challenges later. But one of the issues is it's being framed at the moment in a rather kind of existential threat way. And yet the three of us are, I would say, pretty optimistic about what AI can deliver, provided we get the framework and the guardrails right. I think AI, interestingly, over the last few months, with the release of a number of different forms of AI, and after all, it is extremely varied. But this is generative AI, the ChatGPT, DALL-E, stability diffusion, which allow an individual. This isn't just a great big corporate operation anymore. It isn't just a question of being able to afford these large AI systems, which is how many people were thinking about it up to quite recently. But with OpenAI's ChatGPT in particular, this is now in the hands of individuals to a much greater extent. And that's true of the things like DALL-E, the image creation, and stability diffusion as well. So it does give an opportunity for designers to brainstorm, if you like, using these kinds of tools, and that's what they are. I don't think the thing is to get too worried about the existential threat at this stage if they're used for the right purpose and as creative tools. And certainly in the whole XR area, and I love the way that we now seamlessly move from XR, AR, VR, everything's got an initial user interface, UI, user experience, UX, you've got to develop a whole new bunch of jargon, basically, to actually penetrate some of this world. But I am optimistic. But the big issue is who actually owns a lot of these big engines, and what's the access to them. At the moment, it's open access, open source, and that's really useful. What we don't appear to be able to do, and this is why the government's putting money into what are called exacompute computers and quantum computing and so on, and we don't have the big data sets which are needed to operate on those big computers to create our own generative AI models. A lot of these are going to be in the hands of Silicon Valley. So the question is going to be, well, how do these licenses operate? What kind of data are they using? Are they actually taking people's ingesting, if you like, copyright material, which they already have? So we'll come to that later. But I'm essentially optimistic. And let's face it, some of the movies we've seen of late using AI for for special effects and so on has been amazing. And as Asha says, really an awful lot of this is fundamentally derived from the games industry. And this is one thing I think a lot of people don't understand. The games industry is bigger than every other industry in the creative industries put together nowadays. And that's where an awful lot, and this is where, XR Stories, and this is where Yorkshire, if you like, can really score, to use a cricketing analogy. Where Yorkshire can really score in this whole field, because that is the fundamental area that so much work is going on in the digital field, and digital is what it's all about currently.
So this was something we were speaking about, actually. Anyone been to the amazing ABBA voyage? It's just extraordinary, and I'm not a highly technical person, but when you go to something like that and experience this absolutely extraordinary thing, you kind of go, I don't care how the tech works, that's incredible. It's just an example. So optimism, money being invested, government recognising how important the creative industries are, real strength up here in the north. Damian, can we go back to you and just talk a little bit more about then, if everything was kind of going to go well, keeping optimistic, what could we be looking at here in the north? How good could this be if the stars align?
Okay, it's a really good question. So I think there has already been significant investment in supporting the creative industries in our region, and that is going to continue through this new CoStar initiative. And one should also say that there are other big labs being invested in Dundee and in Belfast, as well as at Royal Holloway just outside of London as well. And they reflect, again, some of the strengths around the UK, as well as what we're doing here in Yorkshire. I think we need to know about it more, I think, here in the region. So it's often referred to Production Park as the hidden jewel in Yorkshire and the creative industries in terms of what they do on a global scale and the reputation that they have. And yet it's not known about. And fundamental to their success and to the success of the creative industries in general, I would suggest, is the skills in the area as well. It's developing a skills pipeline that starts in school and goes all the way through to take a next generation of creatives all the way through so that they're ready for this industry, or perhaps more importantly, they're ready for the change that this industry is going to continue to accelerate through over the next 10 to 20 years. So I think that's really, really important. And I think one of the other interesting aspects of Production Park is they have a training academy on their site called the Academy. Well, no, it's now called the Academy of Live Technology. They just changed the name. I had to check on that before we came. And so they're actually sort of investing in vocational training for the skills that are needed for the industry that is literally on their doorstep. And so I think that's a really, really important aspect of what they do. And now taking that sort of vocational angle, the industry work that's going on there, and then thinking about how R&D through the University of York sort of connection can leverage their business further, again, be ready for the opportunities that come along further down the line is really, really important. But the skills piece is really important. And I think going back to maybe what a role that universities can have more generally in this, aside from the great work they do in science and technology support and the R&D that they offer, it's also been able to take that longer view on the ethical implications around what is being done in this area, thinking about the human aspect of what's being done in this area. This comes back to design, of course, as well. And we can talk about technology, and we can talk about how this is driven by big companies on the west coast of America and elsewhere in the world. But the human at the center of it is really, really important, because we need to design these technologies, these experiences, these stories for people that want to have these stories and want to have these experiences. There's no point just designing them for the sake of it because they're clever. So ethics and design and the human are really, really important. And I think it's something, Yorkshire, great storytellers. I think we're great at doing that.
So one thing I'll come back to in a bit, but having not been to York for a while, this extraordinary sort of juxtaposition of the heritage, the beautiful old kind of city and its history, and also this absolutely cutting edge element as well. And I think there is there's a job to be done on the perception of York, just even focusing on York. So,
I would agree. I think York is not a city like Manchester or Leeds or Sheffield, a post-industrial city where post-industrial spaces are transformed into sort of more creative technology focused spaces. York does it slightly differently. There's a great book written by a colleague of ours in a city called Ben Porter about the creative spaces of York, which really helps you understand where creativity takes place around the city, which is, I'd go and get that if you can, recommended. But also, I should probably give a shout out to my colleagues in history and history of art. Some of the greatest technology of its time you can see in York Minster in the stained glass that's there. That was, the absolute artisanal and technological driver of creativity and storytelling in Europe at a particular point in its history. So York has always been there at the cutting edge of technology and history and storytelling and the future, but we do it slightly different from other people, I think.
Can I just stay on ethics for a little bit? And Tim, come to you in a moment, definitely because of the ethics around AI. Asha, anything you want to add in on ethics around this whole thing?
Oh, wow. Well, interestingly, we've just started scoping some new working groups at Immerse UK that we want to have permanently operating around diversity, inclusion, accessibility of this technology for people specifically with disabilities. Ethics is another working group, and another one on sustainability. And I think that topic is it's all those 4 topics, and there's so many subtopics beneath them. It's a can of worms. There's so many things that still need to be addressed. There's actually some, great work being done kind of internationally as well, like organizations like XR Access, for example, that work on these kinds of topics. But yeah, ethics is deep, right? It's access to the technology, which is an issue. Even just, we were talking about connectivity being like the base layer. We don't even have connectivity at the level that we need across the entire country for everyone to have access to this technology. That's an ethical problem. And then thinking about, global access as well. That's an issue. Thinking about safeguarding for children in immersive spaces. That's a really big deal. Tons of work being done around that. We did a report with the IET around that a few years ago, which has led to I can never remember the acronym for this child protection organization. I think it's NCCP. I can't remember. I'm so sorry, but they've commissioned the researcher from that report to do more deep dive look into what safeguarding really means in virtual worlds and how do we address that. And they were trying to do more future gazing of what's to come, but what's already been found is quite it's a little dark, to be honest, but we need to define these things. We need to address them. We need to think about access and how different people operate in these spaces. And it's a lot of work to be done.
So Tim, I know we sort of touched on this, but the ethics around AI in particular.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? I spend my life thinking about the implications of AI, and it reaches into so many different areas. I always say that AI has really given us the opportunity to, in a sense, rethink so many different areas. Our whole approach to children's safety because of the algorithms online, the whole approach to competition policy because of the access to high-powered computing and data sets, the whole approach to corporate governance because of the way that AI can substitute for jobs. Each of these particular areas requires quite a bit of regulation, I'm afraid to say, and it provides a challenge for politicians to actually understand what the implications are, because you don't want to close down innovation, but regulation sometimes, in my view, can be the encouragement for innovation. You don't want to close down freedom of expression, but on the other hand, you've got to make sure that that young people are protected and that illegal harms online don't flourish, and so on. So the ethics of AI in a broader sense are extremely important, and then you need to start unpacking some of the other regulatory issues. But just for instance, for the use of AI, we have to know in terms of intellectual property, what is the source of some of these data sets? Is it just move fast and break things and just rip off everybody's IP, for instance, particularly in the design field? How transparent is the use of the AI system? Are people passing this off as other people's work, or are they actually deliberately imitating somebody else's work? Is this effectively some sort of deep fake? that they're not attributing to the artist or the creator or the designer. So there are, a lot of different areas. How responsible are people for the use of an AI? Now that these are in the hands of individuals, not just, corporates or government or whatever, individuals will now have to understand, well, I need to own up if I'm using this to write my essay or whatever it is for the future, or design something that is a rip-off of somebody else's. So actually individual ethics are going to be important, not just organizational ethics. And, this raises a lot of societal issues right across the board. And I don't think that, I'm not an existential threat person, but I do think that well in advance of what you call artificial general intelligence, where you've got this kind of ability to operate autonomously in AI, what we really have to do is start putting those guardrails around and understanding what we think is permissible, what is very high risk and therefore needs proper guardrails, and what we can accept as a day-to-day thing, so to speak. But, if I'm an individual designer, I'm going to want to see some of these things. But I would like to know right up front what I should be able to do and what I can't do. And I also want to know, well, if I'm using these tools, are they actually entitled to the IP that I'm developing, and so on and so forth? Yeah. It's very interesting. One final point, that there is now a combined minister for AI and IP. And I think that's a really, really good development, because it means that that minister, who I've got quite a lot of time for, can actually have an overview of the impact of one on the other. And I think that is really important going forward.
I think it's really interesting, like the rapid development of all of these technologies simultaneously, and how they're all starting to converge actually in different ways. And it's so early days for that, like the convergence of XR with AI. And also, has anyone heard of blockchain technology, Web3 technology? A little bit? Yeah. And that was actually
be of great benefit in the IP
exactly,
area.
Exactly. And it was like one of the hottest topics on the Next Tech stage at London Tech Week this past week, which is the convergence of all these technologies, and how, yes, and all these ethical concerns we're talking about, some of them could potentially help the others with that. So using blockchain technology, for example, to protect IP, and to make sure that artists and designers benefit from their work, no matter whoever else uses it afterwards. And then in things like another ethical issue I didn't mention in XR, but around data privacy and the use, especially of people's biometric data. Okay, and this is something that's of great concern to me. I don't know, has anyone played Beat Saber in VR before? It's this like game where you like chop blocks and there's music. It's the biggest game in VR. And there was a study that was done in where was it? Berkeley, I think it was. And they basically found that like using Beat Saber for 10 minutes, they can literally take your body movements, and they can identify you based off your gait with 90 like 5% accuracy of something like that. And I was like, okay, well, how many people are actually gonna go in and play Beat Saber for 10 minutes? But actually they can do it with like 73% accuracy if you play for 10 seconds, so that's a lot. There's a lot of different things. And on the one hand, that's a little scary, but I like to, the positive flip side of that is also the, using people's biometric data in order to use experiences, for example, for people with disabilities. You could see it as an accessibility thing. So it's like, well, how do we enable people to own their own data, be able to toggle on and off which data gets used? So maybe you turn on the eye tracking in an experience because you can't move actually, so you need to move through your experience using your eyes. How do we enable that kind of thing? So I try to look at the positive side of it, but yeah, that's.
So I'm just wondering, this is me paraphrasing on this, but actually, while all this incredible technological and creative and design advances happening, we do need people who are really trying to keep up and get ahead, if possible, on the guardrails, whether that's policy or legislation, exactly what it looks like. We need that to be running in parallel fast. But the fact we have a minister, at least now, with that remit is
and
a good thing.
they've got quite an agenda. I mean,
They have.
the one thing I'd add to Asha's is that, of course, now performing rights are in real trouble, because if you can extract the biometric data effectively of somebody's performance, they could be a musician or an actor or whatever, and Equity's got quite a big campaign on this. AI can actually fake them forever, so you can be you can do Mission Impossible and rip it off completely. Tom Hanks's performance, completely. And you don't even need a license if you've got his biometrics, and the implications of that are huge.
They are huge. You wanted to say something, and then what?
Did you want to add? Dave, you want to add anything? Because I want to
I guess I was just going to go back to one of the points about ethics, actually, and it's the inherent biases in the data sets that have been used to get to this point in terms of where we are with AI and how they're fundamentally not representative of our wider demographic in the world, and very focused on one thing. And that means that if we want an equitable and ethical future for this technology, then we need to make sure that more people are involved in its creation and its consumption, and also in the data that we're using, and being more careful about and understanding what our data is and what we're letting go, and what we need to keep and keep private. But we do need a more equitable landscape to train these models more effectively, so that they're more representative of our society rather than focusing on one particular aspect of it.
Can I just add to that? Because I think that's absolutely right. I think AI makes you think very much about the makeup of the tech workforce, if you like, as well. Diversity is absolutely crucial if you're going to avoid the biases and the prejudices, in a sense, of the past. But also it makes you think about, well, where is the reward for this going? In societal terms, it's another area where AI makes you think, do we need some sort of universal benefit system to make up for the fact that AI may eventually substitute for quite a lot of jobs?
It's really good when you're chairing to have the largest bell going off as your landline. It's just fabulous. It's like having a huge clock on your wrist. So let's start bringing it in a bit. Regenerate. So we're speaking here in York about this exciting moment in time, this technology, this creativity, and how we can harness it. And there's government are taking it seriously. So what, Damian, actually starting with you, what are some of the barriers? What are the things that are going to get in the way of us really making this work for the people, the economy, communities?
I think it goes back to one of the. We've talked a lot about ethics. We can probably never talk quite enough about it. I think that's fundamentally important, and also the more we have these conversations, the more people understand what this is about. There is a great moment at the moment. It seems about AI capturing the imagination and what this might mean, and so it's starting to encourage people to have conversations and to understand some of the quite complex implications of what all of this means. I think so. That's one thing. It's definitely worth continuing the conversation about. I will go back to the skills aspect. I think it's important for us here in the City of York to understand what the opportunities are going to be for our young people as they come through, and to understand that, and we see this at my university, at York St John, at universities elsewhere in our region, that we want to build opportunities in our region. We want to build opportunities in this area that we are world leading in, so that people can be part of it rather than have to go somewhere else to be part of it or feel that they're not included in this conversation. So I think that's really important, and that's a job that we have to do from in schools upwards. And I give a shout out to our Reach partnership, which is one of the things that takes culture into schools in York, and is working on that, and is working with some of the businesses in our city to start again exploring these conversations and opportunities with the future generation of creatives. So that's really, really important. Skills is definitely going to make that key part. And also I think it's a little bit of a shift in, again, thinking about York and thinking about our region. York and North Yorkshire is a rural region, effectively, and we're going to become a mayoral combined authority. And where York sits in that is quite interesting and important, I think. And we have an opportunity to influence and have an impact on our communities more widely between here and the coast, and those creative communities and those creative artists, and try and enable them to have access to this technology and access to these skills and new opportunities that are going to come along, because we're not Leeds and we're not Sheffield and we're not Bradford, who are very different sort of types of city and very metropolitan cities, and there are stronger clusters of particular businesses there. So I think we need to understand that and reflect that, maintain those strong connections with our region, but build opportunities for our next generation of creatives coming through, and understand how that can have an impact more widely across our more rural landscape. So it's quite a big, tall order I've set ourselves there, but there we go.
It is. And Asha, and then Tim, and then be thinking of questions.
I just want to jump in on just from like the national and international perspective on this too. Like there are some interesting national reports that were done on the skills gap by Story Futures Academy, on the skills gap in the XR space, skills gap specifically in virtual production space. And I think like just our country having actually done that, like doing that deep dive, because it's very complex, that skills gap, and how we fill it. The fact that we have that knowledge already nationally, the fact that a cluster like York already, like this area already understands it and is working on we're very far ahead, I think, compared to other places. It's a good thing.
That is good to hear. Tim, anything to add on this?
Oh, yeah, sadly. Quite a bit. I mean, on the skills gap, I'm afraid freedom of movement from Europe has made, I think, quite a big difference. And we need to really think hard about a number of aspects of how we can improve our skills. I don't think we're putting enough into the boot camps. I don't think the apprenticeship levy, particularly for smaller businesses, is good enough. We need to do various root and branch things, and I don't really understand why we haven't to date, whether it's just a simple matter of lack of prioritization or a real unwillingness to change the apprenticeship levy system. But that, for me, is really important in the skills area, and it's so important. Yeah. If you're going to have a cluster, you've got to have the skills to develop it and grow it. And this is a fantastic story here in Yorkshire. It really is. And I understand the slight nervousness about it's got a combined authority aspect, because you don't want to get sort of marginalised within a bigger structure. But, and I'm a big fan of Tracy Brabin. I worked with her for a little bit and when she was in the Commons, and I think she's a great, to have a creative mayor, I think is a great thing. So, it's not, combining things isn't an unalloyed benefit. But on the other aspects, reform of intellectual property, we are nowhere near fit for purpose in terms of the way that our designers are protected. If you write something as an author, you've got far, far greater protection than you have as a designer, or as even as an artist. You've got much better protection than you do as a designer. And a designer is rather like a kind of Victorian approach to, they're in trade, they do designs for products, whereas if you're an artist or a writer, you have copyright. You can get somebody in the magistrates up in the magistrates court. You can't do that with unregistered designs. There are all sorts of reasons why AI is a real issue in this whole area of intellectual property as well. So that all needs sorting out, enforcement, and the actual name of the game. I mentioned to you earlier, Minnie, the Australian paper that they've just put out, consultation paper about AI and design rights in Australia. And they've given the example of an AI that can simply say, well, look, just do perpetually designs based on this chair in a slightly different form. And it produces thousands and thousands and thousands of different designs based on that chair. And it means that effectively it's almost impossible for anybody to get any protection, because all these designs, even though they're never put into production, are out there. And when you do a search, the intellectual property office says, I'm sorry, it's already somebody's already done that. It's not novel anymore. So there are issues like that which are a real problem, which need dealing with. And I think finally, I think the whole network aspect is really important. It's not just about the clustering, it's about having networks and the power of information across the networks as well. So I would go for that. I think it may not be inevitably part of being a cluster, that you have those networks. But it requires quite a lot of effort for the people in a particular region to pull that together. I mean, we see how the network effect operates on social media. So maybe Yorkshire needs its own social media to bring it all together.
Connect it. Do we have any questions? Yeah, please. I think we have a microphone coming your way.
My name's George. I'm from Worcestershire. We're entrusting this technology to criminals, though, like Mark Zuckerberg, who his companies have been fined hundreds of millions of dollars repeatedly for breaking the same law. He was fined £1 billion last month. Instagram was fined $400 million last year for criminally misusing the data of children. And you brought up child protection. Surely any technological advancement that this country embarks on or embraces, if it's got the word Mark Zuckerberg anywhere near it, we should be running a mile. Even our politicians are on Facebook. Our lawmakers are encouraging us to download mobile apps that are run by lawbreakers. Ed Davey is on Instagram. Instagram is a company that hosts drug dealers, terrorists, paedophiles, fraudsters, Vladimir Putin. And yet our lawmakers are asking us to download that technology from those criminals in Silicon Valley. So my suggestion is that in about 5 years' time, we're going to wish we could rewind time to 2023 and we pulled the flipping plug, because this isn't going to end as well as some of you seem to think it's going to end. That's just, I'm just putting that out there. Okay, thanks.
This is the argument, though, for that people use who are, believers in the development of an open metaverse that is not owned by large tech companies. So the idea behind using blockchain enable people to own their own data, and through the use of that's kind of the argument that they have. I mean, none of us up here, I think, would say that we are, agree with any of those things. And obviously they are, we're aware of the issues. To put it mildly.
Yeah. And I mean, in some respects, I'm not going to repeat any of the words because I'd probably be sued for libel. But basically, I agree with you in some respects. I read Jaron Lanier's book, 10 Reasons to Delete Your Facebook Account, and did so immediately afterwards. And I don't have any Facebook connection. So in spirit, I agree with you. But what we're here for, and legislators are always behind the curve, sadly, where we should be enforcing competition policy. We've only just got a new digital markets bill coming through. We should be enforcing online safety legislation. Well, that's taken 5 years to come through. We should be putting AI guardrails around. That's taken 6 years to come through. So, I mean, you're right in spirit, but I am an optimist about being able to do something about it.
I think
it's the pace, isn't it? It's the pace. Yeah. I think the pace of the technological advancement and change, we just do not currently have the ability to keep up with it.
Well, yeah, we could actually.
We could with AI.
But it's about priorities. If we weren't busy, and I'll make a political point here, if we weren't busy passing illegal migration bills, we might actually, and spend a bit more time on proper regulation, we might be in better shape.
Damian,
yeah, I was just going to. My point is that as an educator, fundamentally, it's our responsibility to educate, and we all have to take a responsibility in that. I remember when Gmail accounts first came out. Oh, this is brilliant! It's going to make our lives so much easier. But of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and we know that now. We know, or we're starting to unpick what the consequences of the free lunch we've been offered every time we download a new app or whatever. And so fundamentally, me working at a university, our teachers working in schools, parents at home have to educate the next generation so that they're well aware or understand what the implications of some of these very exciting, shiny technological advances might be.
Yeah, and that actually kind of goes into a point I was thinking earlier when we were talking about the barriers, which is, education at younger levels, from the earliest levels. That's actually something, and we also hear it from industry a lot as well, that we're doing a lot at the university levels and maybe in high school levels, but from the youngest age, we really need to be having these conversations. We need them understanding the technology from these young ages. They're already using it. Kids are like, and they're the users of the future. What are we building? We're building, this stuff for people who are going to use it in 10, 20 years. Those are the kids now. So we should, that's.
And we haven't prioritized media literacy either.
No, we haven't. Yeah,
That's
and that's
exactly
a problem.
another area that we should be doing. But I'm going to sound like a crack record here, but the EU passed the AI Act in their parliament just last week. And they've got, a little bit of a process to go through with the Council of Ministers, but they are very nearly there with a full set of regulation around AI. And they have a full set of regulation around digital markets, and they have a full set of regulation around digital services, i.e. online services. So they got 3 acts through when we've got none.
Yes, the gentleman at the back with his hand up.
I'm a member of Multi-Academy Trust, a trustee, and in terms of learning, in terms of schools and the phrase behind the curve, I think schools certainly are behind the curve. And I was going to ask if you had, or what thoughts you had about how we begin to prepare the next generation in terms of the curriculum, the sort of what they actually study in schools, and staffing and preparing the teaching force to make that vision, which is clearly crucially important. Particularly, I think, because there's almost an inverted pyramid of knowledge now, whereby the students are more likely to understand what the current, more about the technology than the current teaching force is.
Yes.
So where do we go? We know we need to do something in education, but can we be a little more specific about the sort of things that we actually need to do?
Yeah, a good question, thanks. I think Asha, start there. What do we need to do?
Gosh, this is a personal opinion just about like teaching kids generally, and that it's these days, and you're right, they know more than potentially like the teacher who's teaching them on specific things. And I think there's something about teaching creative thinking and critical thinking, teaching kids to inspiring kids to learn to love learning, as opposed to forcing them to do a specifically designed curriculum, and knowing that because they're going to need to change so many times as this stuff develops. The life of working in one job for 30 years doesn't exist anymore. Even for my generation, people stay maybe 5 years in a job. And I think like having that level of fluidity and creativity is so important. And that's a different type of education than what we currently do, which is sit and read something out of a book, everybody do the same quiz. Like, I don't know, it's a whole, you have to like holistically, the whole education process probably needs to be looked at. And teaching teachers, that's a big one. And I'll just highlight a program that Story Futures Academy ran that was quite interesting, called Train the Trainers. And it was specifically to upskill educators so that they could bring immersive technology into their classrooms and understand how to deploy it, understand, how to make a curriculum around it. And that was a really interesting program. But again, that was part of it was funded out of a program called Audience of the Future, which is only £33 million to basically help grow the sector. And again, it was like one part of like a whole bunch of work that they did. So there's something probably bigger around upskilling educators and putting more funding towards that. But yeah, it's important.
Damian.
Yeah, it's also fundamentally about a shift in the curriculum and how and what's going on in our schools. Of course, STEM and STEM and STEM, we always hear that. And yes, of course, it's important, but we shouldn't just be teaching the basics of physics and maths and biology. Of course, that's fundamentally important, but it's where they're applied which is really important as well. Yeah. And we need to make sure that the arts and humanities are fundamental to our education as well, because without those, then there's no balance. And of course, where does that take place? It takes place more than anywhere, that combination of arts, humanities and STEM in the creative sector and the creative industries. And so there's a huge opportunity there to really underline the STEM agenda with the arts agenda and the humanities agenda through understanding that the creative industries is fundamentally built on science, but it's about culture and it's about storytelling and it's about art and it's about creativity and all the good things that make us human. And I think there's a wider sense that it was one of the debates that was going on here yesterday, that people don't necessarily understand what the creative and cultural sectors are about. It's a nice thing that happens down here, and people can do it when they're they're wealthy enough to have
retired.
When they've retired. Well, yeah, it's all of that, but actually it's fundamental to our country and our country's success. And if you monetize it, God help us thinking about it in that way, then we can actually say, okay, we can prioritize it because it's about growth. And with that growth, we get social capital and we get cultural capital, and then we can embed it in our curriculum such that it all underpins and joins up, rather than, it all being separated out as soon as you get to school and deciding what subject you're going to do and how you're going to work in STEM, and you're going to not become a dancer and you're going to work in AI instead. Well, actually, the very best of dancing in the future will be fundamentally built on some of AI, and you need to be able to do both. So it's less split and it's more joining up, and the creative industries is where that can happen.
I absolutely agree with Damian. Very soon, GPT-4 will be writing very good code, and it already is writing pretty average code, and it'll be writing better and better code as time goes on. So the idea that life is all about STEM skills is completely wrong. I mean, if you look at Kingston University's surveys on this of employers as to what they want critical and creative abilities, basically. And what it's going to be about is, can you use these tools in a creative way? And they could be blockchain, they could be Internet of Things, they could be AI, all kinds of different tech tools, but it's how you use them that's going to be really important. And I really do empathise with teachers in this respect, because the potential of some of these things like AI. I sat on an ethical AI institute chaired by Anthony Selden not long ago, and the problem is that nobody knows what the guardrails around the use of AI should be when you're trying to personalise education. Use of data and all this kinds of thing is really quite complicated. So it's a really tricky world. So I think Ash is absolutely right that we need to be much more proactive with our teachers in terms of helping them understand the new world. But we shouldn't make the mistake of just thinking it's all about STEM.
We have got time for one super speedy question. Chris.
Chris Barrett. I'm involved in early stage support for the creative industries, both from public and private funding. So earlier in the year, we had a House of Lords report saying creative industries at risk. We've now got this fantastic response from DCMS and the Creative Industries Council. But the theme here, we've got regenerate, and we've talked a lot about clusters. I'm trying to understand, is the purpose here to support rising creative skills across the country, or are we trying to create local centres of expertise? I think it's probably Damian's, I think, the first person I'm going to look to for an answer there.
And they're going to thank you, Chris. And it's super speedy.
Yeah, okay.
We're winding up soon.
It's really interesting to look at where the creative clusters currently are, the current 9, and what they focus on. And there's a significant bias to the creative screen industries and areas of the country where they're important. What's really, I think what the next bit of the creative sector vision and the next generation of clusters, it has to fill gaps. So it has to fit. And I think, the ones that are successful now is because of this coming together of technology in the screen industries and what that means and how everyone's trying to address this. But, we look at parts of the country, there's nothing across the Midlands. And I know the Midlands felt, as a Midlander, ex-Midlander, feel very sort of sore that they got left out of that conversation. So there's geographical parts of the country that need addressing, and there's also sectoral parts of the country that need addressing. One of the big massive gaps in the current creative clusters sort of portfolio is music. Music is hugely successful for the UK, but there's nothing to support R&D for the music industry, and so that's really, really important. So how do given that this comes via universities, how do universities get together and leverage that expertise for what the industry wants? And similarly, there's nothing in design, there's nothing in architecture, there's nothing in publishing. So there's clear areas of our creative industries that are very successful that need support in the same way the screen and live performance have through the current clusters portfolio. Yet there's definitely work to be done and gaps to be filled.
Thank you. So being hopeful, because I think that there's lots of challenge and there's lots of complexity, but I'm hearing overarchingly there is this big opportunity and it's a strength here. So how do we seize it? So let's end just with a hopeful thought, please, from each of you, a sort of a positive and hopeful thought about what the creative industries, this kind of wonderful createch thing that we're talking about, can bring. Go on, Asha. You got a thought?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I always think to myself is, we could see this in a dystopian way, or we could see this as the beginning of a whole new creative renaissance. This let's see these things as tools. Let's stay human centered, with our focus, and just and if you're interested in this technology and where it's all going, don't feel daunted by it. Just start doing things with it. Actually start experimenting and using the tools.
My hopeful thing, I'm going to bring it back to something was briefly mentioned at the beginning by Minnie, is ABBA Voyage. If you haven't go. It's the most remarkable thing.
Really good.
It's a joyous experience. Now, I've been, loads of my colleagues have been, and we're all there kind of looking at it creatively and sort of analysing it and thinking, this is all very interesting, isn't it? It's the most remarkable experience, and you just forget about that eventually, and you just get sucked up in it. And so you've got basically a really big TV screen, plus some musicians that are kept tucked away in the corner, communicating with 3,000 people at every performance, and it's utter joyousness. And you're kind of going, what is this thing that you're part of? And it's hard to know, but it is quite remarkable. It took sort of 5 to 7 years and $140 million to do it, and globally leading IP in what ABBA are doing to curate their own IP ultimately into the future by saying, right, let's do it first before somebody else does it. And it produces the most amazing thing. And I'm going to bring it back to something else. It brings it back to the design of the experience. The whole thing is curated from start to finish. Shout out to Stage One just over the road in near Tockwith in York, did some of the staging for it. The whole onboarding, as we'd call it, is just amazing.
Human-centered design.
Human-centered design.
Human-centered design. Yeah, hear to that. Go see it. It's worth every penny. Tim.
For me, I'm a boring legislator. For me, it's about making sure that technology is our servant, not our master. And if we master it ourselves, if it's our servant, then we can be immensely creative. We can do things that we couldn't otherwise have done. And I think that's what's so fantastic. I mean, I absolutely buy into the clusters, the catapults, all the creative and tech industry activity taking place. But as individuals, it's really important that we fulfill our own talents and our lives reflect that. And I think that some of this tech can help us do that, but we have to make sure that we've got the right regulation around it. And it isn't all about Silicon Valley dominating just a few bits of AI. I don't want to see a dystopian future where you have 3 AIs and it's like Coke and Pepsi or whatever. You have to choose and they dominate the whole of your lives. And this, in the same way that, for instance, what about app stores? There are only 2 sets of app stores, aren't there, effectively? And yet we have to choose. I don't want that to be the case in the future.
And I just want to come back to something that Asha said right at the beginning. We are world leaders on creativity. There's not loads of things we're world leaders on anymore, but we are world leaders on creativity. We have that reputation still and that perception, and that is something, therefore, that's so precious for us to keep that, invest in it, be proud of it, and see it as a massive opportunity to regenerate going forward. Ladies, gentlemen, lovely young lady over there who looks like she wants to go to ABBA. She was smiling very, very widely about ABBA. Your hands together for our fabulous panel. Thank you.